So let's get started with our opening session, Lessons from Surfside. The Champlain Towers collapse in Surfside was one of the most tragic events in our community's history. Those of us who lost friends in that tragedy feel a sense of responsibility to do whatever we can to prevent a similar event in the future. And while the investigation into the cause of the collapse will continue, there are several lessons that have been learned from this tragedy. And as a point of personal privilege, I want to dedicate this session to our good friend Mark Guara, who alongside his wife and 2 young daughters perished that awful day. Our panel today is a large one and is composed of experts and leaders who were mobilized immediately in the aftermath of the collapse and offered their leadership to our community in a very difficult time. Our first panelist not only worked tirelessly from the early moments of that collapse, but represents the first responders and public safety professionals who showed us once again their bravery and dedication in the face of extraordinary challenges. Please welcome the Miami-Dade County's Chief of Safety and Emergency Response, Alfredo Freddy Ramirez. Next, we have one of our very own LBA board members. He is the founder and president of Global Pro with years of experience in construction and insurance. Please welcome Dan Odess. Our next panelist is a shareholder in the law firm of Siegfried Rivera, a proud LBA member who represents condominium and homeowners associations throughout Florida and has been designated by the Florida Bar as a board-certified specialist in condominium and plan development law. Please welcome Roberto Blanche. Our next panelist, we totally talked her into doing this. We talked her into participating in this because I know she's one of the hardest working individuals in county administration and probably has her desk filled to the brim. She's one of the most respected public servants in our community and serves as the director of the Department of Regulatory and Economic Resources. Please welcome Ms. Lourdes Gomez. Next panelist really needs no introduction to the LBA. He is the former chairman of the Miami-Dade County Commission, served as commissioner representing District 12 for 20 years, and was recently elected, unopposed, as the next mayor of the city of Sweetwater. Most importantly, he's a director emeritus of the Latin Builders Association. Please welcome our good friend, Jose Pepe Diaz. And rounding off our panel is an individual who has represented his community for more than 20 years. He began his life in public service as a councilman in the city of Hialeah, followed by a tenure in the Florida legislature, first as a state representative and then as a state senator. He currently serves as Miami-Dade County Commissioner representing District 13, his hometown. Please help me welcome the Honorable Senator Rene Garcia. And to serve as our moderator, he is a member of the LBA Board of Directors and serves as our expert on all things related to property management and engineering, the founder and CEO of Affinity Home Management Services, Rafael Aquino.
Thank you, Gus, and thank you to everyone that's here. It's honestly an honor to be the moderator for this panel, especially this distinguished panel, so thank you all. Thank you all who are here today. There's a lot that we're going to discuss, but let me start off with a little bit about myself. My name is Rafael Aquino. I am the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management Services. We're a community association management company. We service Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and now Colliers County. Our goal and our growth has really occurred because of our core passion, which is making sure that our community association leaders execute their vision. We support community associations throughout 70 associations and close to 15,000 doors. So now let's shift the conversation to really our focus and why we're here today. Today, we're here to go over, as Gus said, the lessons that we've learned through the tragic event at Champlain Tower South. What that event and that tragedy brought was light to several lessons and many ways that we need to basically wake up as an industry, and especially here that we're in a construction expo, of what we could do to make sure that this event never occurs again. What the tragedy did do, it highlighted the importance of regular maintenance, the inspections of buildings, as well as the need of better communication between building owners and engineers and local government officials for the safety of our buildings. We'll talk plenty about SB4D, aka also known as the Surfside bill. So let's go ahead and kick this off. So I wanted to start off with Commissioner Garcia and former Commission Chair Diaz. What immediate steps did Miami-Dade County take to ensure that kind of tragedy never occurred again?
Well, let's start out by first thanking all of you for this Expo. I think it's very important, and I want to thank the President Cabrera, for making this happen, especially with things that are so important to all of us, and all the Latin builders. This was probably one of the worst days we've ever had in Dade County. And it's a day that I was woken up very early, and we rushed over to the scene. The director was already there, many others, especially our firefighters. And I would tell you that in a moment like that, it's very difficult to get a hold of it, what's going on. So we had the very best in the world there. Our firefighters were, thank God, we have them here in Miami-Dade County, and they immediately responded and tried to save lives and do what needed to be done, and also securing the building at the same time to be able to make sure that the building didn't collapse on top of the firefighters. So they were trying to get people out at the same time doing this. I was there along with and our mayor, which did an incredible job, and I would tell you that it was working together. So what do? We made sure that they did their job, and they had everything they needed to do the job that they needed to do, to make sure that things will be done as rapid and as best as possible. Once again, we were blessed with great commissioners that showed up at the same time. Everybody worked together, and we did what we needed to do, because yes, we immediately had to see how was this happening? Are the other buildings around coming down? Everything else. But I know it's going to be a lot of it being spared up here, so I'll hold off it. I got the senator right next to me.
One of the things that we first did when Pepe and Commissioner, the mayor, congratulations on your re-election without any opposition.
Pepe's good.
One of the first commissioners that were there was Pepe and myself, and when I first got up onto the south building and I looked down and I saw the total devastation that had occurred, one of the first thoughts that I had was there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction to overregulate. And usually when we have these types of incidents, it's always a knee-jerk reaction to overregulate. And one of the things that I first did at that point was said, let's put in an ordinance. We have those holds here in Miami-Dade County to make sure that at least, like-minded individuals could have some type of direction as moving forward. And this is where now we see that we had the regulatory scheme that we have now for the re-inspections, because that it's now 30 years. It used to be 40 years. Now it's 30 years and a couple of other components to it. But you should see the conversations that were being had throughout this time where the people wanted to have the re-inspections every 10 years. And this is why it's important for all of us in policy making to make sure that we don't overregulate, don't have these knee-jerk reactions when we have tragedies, try to get all the information to make sure we have the best policy forward. And I think in collaboration with the state and with us and the county commission and with the commissioner and the chairman's leadership at that time, we came out with a regulatory scheme that we have before us today.
Yeah, excellent. I have to agree, though, with Pepe as well that, the way that both our firefighters and the police force stepped in was amazing. And it was amazing to see as well as how we had individuals from Israel and so forth coming in to help. So that definitely...
I have to add one thing. If it weren't for the people that we had, once again, it wasn't just the firefighters, you're absolutely correct, it was our police. But if it wasn't for the leadership of Freddie Ramirez that's sitting up here, I would tell you a lot of things wouldn't have been done the way they were done. So thank you.
Definitely, thank
for
you.
that.
So I want to bring in Director Gomez and Chief Ramirez into the conversation. So obviously there was a lot going on at that time that you were having to manage. And one of the things I'm sure that came to mind was the buildings in the general vicinity. You know, were there any other concerns? So I wanted to bring you into the conversation to see what was done and what safeguards were put into place to ensure that other buildings weren't impacted.
Well, certainly a number of measures were taken. If you remember the news from the time, many building jurisdictions, including Miami-Dade, launched building inspections on high-rise structures immediately. And we received at the time calls daily from the panicked public, of course, concerned, seeing a crack that, perhaps the day before they had walked by unnoticed, today, was calling their attention. So that was an immediate reaction, not just of the unincorporated jurisdiction, but also all of the jurisdictions, to my knowledge, pretty much launched their own assessments and did an inventory of their existing unsafe cases in light of Surfside.
Correct. Mr. Ramirez?
Hello? Yes, for us, for the search and rescue part, first I want to commend our firefighters, our USAR team, our homicide detectives, our Israeli team, they came over to help us as well. All the engineers and construction companies that came to heavy lifting, because one of the hardest part is as we were doing the recovery of victims, the search, we had to move that debris. Fire department was running out of space, and it occurred really quick how massive that collapse was. So much so that we had to hire engineers to keep an eye on the different pillars that were still standing to make sure that they weren't pivoting that would cause another hazard to our first responders. And yes, in that inner perimeter where the command post was, where the mayor was sitting, where we were making decisions, we were around all these buildings that at the time we weren't really sure if there would be secondary collapses. There was another building down the street that was built exactly like this one. So obviously the community of Surfside was very up in arms and in concern, and rightfully so. But fortunately, all of us working together, we were able to ensure that the area was safe and we could focus on the search and rescue and then eventually the recovery.
And I wanted to keep it with you, being that we're in a business expo, technology has been moving at light speeds. We have AI, so much coming in that it's honestly going to provide benefits, not just to the construction industry, but to many industries, especially for you and your force. So was there any technology that was used to help in the search and rescue? If so, what was used?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we had to bring in NIST, which is a national investigation agency for those type of things that handled 9/11 and other issues like that, to help us investigate this. Because for police, we were focused on the death investigation, the loss of 98 victims, and the recovery of property and family unification centers and all those kind of things that were really the emotional part of the investigation. But for our USAR teams, yes, they used lasers, they had infrared type technologies to try to identify victims and recover them as quick as we can. But for the investigative component, we definitely hired our own engineer to parallel NIST. And in the next couple of years, NIST will provide their findings. And then that'll go through its legal process. Right now, we're in that investigative phase, but it's heavily relying on that.
Yeah, I could say from the outside in, it definitely looked like things were going seamlessly. Obviously, it was a very difficult situation to deal with, but I have to say that from the outside in, it looked like things were going flawlessly. So, former Chair Diaz, I wanted to ask, now going into a little bit of the legislation, what role did Miami-Dade County play in drafting and passing the Surfside bill?
Well, the number one role that we had, the mayor and I, when I was chairman, got together, and what we did is we created a giant meeting with all our partners, the federal, state, local partners, municipalities, everybody else to work together along with my colleagues. Renee, as he said before, a senator, you know, we had to create a lot of, everybody wanted to create a bunch of laws and a bunch of things, and everybody was trying to rush, but yeah, we didn't know yet what it, and Lourdes did an incredible job trying to slow down and talk to people and putting it together, because everybody wanted to do laws, to do this, do that, you know. So our goal was to really understand from all our partners what everybody could do and working together. So our role was basically not only leading it because of the county's positioning, but also working hand in hand with the municipalities because each one had different situations and different money issues, different types of buildings. You know, these buildings mostly were on the edge of the water, and most of it is Miami Beach, Miami, so on. But you know, there's a lot of cities that don't have big buildings, and whether 30-year, 40-year, 20 years, everybody was very reactive. So I think our goal was mostly to work with the industry, including the Latin builders and many others too, to try to find a common ground so we would do the right thing for our citizens always. But we had great legislators that came up with great bills on our side of the fence, but using everybody and working together. So Miami-Dade County, I think, did a great job. I give kudos to the mayor, also with the administration, and all of us and my colleagues and I working together to make sure that that funnel of knowledge will come out in a perfect way in the right legislation. And that was our main role.
No, and I would agree with you there because what's great is that we're working as a unit because speaking from the association management side, the legislation can have and will have many impacts to the homeowners and to the residents. And if things aren't done in the way that they should, where everyone is communicating on what the potential impacts would be, it's affecting our community. So, Robbie, you and I work together a lot in the community association space. Siegfried Rivera represents hundreds, if not thousands, of associations. Could you give us like a 30,000-foot perspective of the bill and what it was comprised of?
As a result of the tragedy, a lot of questions were being asked with regard to what was the cause of this catastrophe. And some of the potential thoughts were that, well, maybe the board of directors could have done a better job in reserving or planning so that these issues don't repeat themselves. So as far as this legislation is concerned, what the legislature did is require that the associations perform what they call structural integrity reserve studies on a periodic basis so that every association is mandated to reserve for the components of the building that are deemed to address the structure and safety of the property. And those reserves adopted for the condominium buildings that exceed 3 stories in height cannot be waived, so that we don't have a situation where unit owners are voting to waive the reserves or not tax themselves and have the funds required to adequately maintain the structure and safety of their buildings. The other thing that they did was they incorporated the concept of milestone inspections, which Miami-Dade County trailblazers in this regard, but nowhere else in the state other than Broward County was there this 40-year recertification concept. Right. So what the legislature did was borrowed in a sense from Miami-Dade County and Broward County and required this milestone inspection comparable to the 40-year recertification, and now the county is at a 30-year as opposed to the 40 years. So the statutes and the ordinances locally are somewhat more on parity. With regard to properties that are within 3 miles from the coast, given the additional impacts that and wear and tear that being in near proximity to the coastline might have, that 30 years for milestone inspections is reduced to 25 years. And again, this is also for buildings that are 3 stories or higher. So those are the 2 main aspects of what the legislation did with regard to addressing some of this. Now, granted, we don't know what led to that disaster. Yeah. But at a minimum, hopefully, we can address from the condominium association perspective, you know, some of these issues that have been cited as possible causes for this tragedy.
Right, yeah, and that's a great point of how you bring in the structural integrity, how they mentioned the structural integrity reserves. I can say from the management side that it's definitely going to help. It's going to make the decision much easier for board members if they have the money to do the necessary repairs, because not all associations are not funded. Some are, some are not. But those that aren't find themselves in a very difficult situation because they're just having to decide, do I do the lobby or do I fix the structure? In this case now, they're going to find themselves in a position where they could do what's right for the community, and it'll be easier to be a homeowner. The only problem is that there's going to be some difficulties throughout the process. So I want to keep it with you, Robbie, because I know that there's some timelines associated with when these reserves, structural integrity reserves, need to be in place, and when the inspections need to be done. So if you can give us some highlights on the timelines.
Sure. So the critical dates right now in the legislation, which, by the way, there's more legislation still pending now that might address and modify some of these timeframes. Maybe you can help us with this. But right now there's a date of December 31st, 2024. Once, with regard to the milestone inspections, buildings that are 30 years or older will have to comply with those requirements by that date. Otherwise, as of that date, once you become 30 years from your CO, you will be receiving a notification from the authority having jurisdiction, wherever you reside, whatever local government is responsible for your property. And from the time you receive that notice, you will have to submit your report to the county or to the authority having jurisdiction and have your milestone inspection performed from that date. I believe it's 180 days from notice, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a two-phase process. So phase one, if phase one of the milestone inspection determines that the property does not have any substantial deterioration or substantial structural deterioration, then you do not have to go to a phase two. If there is a finding of substantial structural deterioration, then phase two will be triggered, and depending on what the engineer or architect doing the inspection determines, will dictate the timeframes within which the repairs will have to be performed for the building. Some might be complex, some might not. So that really depends on what the engineers and architects find. With regard to the structural integrity reserve studies, again, December 31st, 2024 is the trigger date by which those reserve studies need to be completed for condominium associations.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Robbie. And one important point that I wanted to also bring up, it's the actual reserves. By that same timeline, as it states right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Robbie, they're going to have those funds in reserves, correct?
Yeah, unfortunately, many condominiums don't have reserves or don't have adequate reserves. And as such, associations would be well advised, and association boards would be well advised to have a very elaborate and comprehensive analysis of where they stand with regard to the funding of reserves, because if you wait till the last minute, you might have to assess yourselves millions of dollars and think of all of the associations, all of the condo associations and co-ops in our county alone that are 3 stories and higher that are going to have to put a burden on engineers and architects to get these calculations in place in order to determine what is the correct amount to be funding in reserves, and then find from where to generate these sources. A lot of these associations may not have access, and we're talking about times of much higher interest rates now as well, so they may not have access to conventional means of borrowing funds. So, where are they going to generate these funds if not from assessing their own owners? And if they don't have access to long-term financing to be able to fund and infuse those reserve accounts, then you're probably looking at a situation where owners in buildings, and many of these buildings are not, high scale, high end, multi-million-dollar units. We're talking about, paycheck to paycheck type individuals that may have to deal with funding assessments for huge amounts of reserves, and that might put a big burden on them. It might result in foreclosure to some of these folks. So these owners really need to, these boards need to be very proactive and start easing into the funding of these reserves. That's what we're advising all of our clients.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Robbie. I mean, we're basically doing the same thing. It's kind of, I would say it's a 60-40 split for us, where 60% are trying to hold off and see if changes are going to happen to legislation. But as things stand right now, there isn't much that's going to change with regards to the timelines of when these funds need to be in place. So yeah, there is going to be a financial impact. So, Director Gomez, I wanted to bring you into the conversation when it comes to engaging with building owners, developers. What has the county done to ensure compliance with some of the provisions that have been passed?
Yes, so late last year, actually, we launched a series of webinars that were intended to educate both design professionals and property managers. And we actually still have those. We recorded them. They were Zoom webinars, and we still have them posted online. So if you're looking for a refresher on any of the information that's been discussed here with respect to Miami-Dade County requirements, you can find that on the Miami-Dade recertification web page. Just keep in mind, of course, as was mentioned, that there are 35, cities, within our county. So you have to be sure that you are following your own jurisdiction's requirements, but certainly the template that you find on the Miami-Dade County page is the standard basic template for the recertification reports in this community. We also, through my department, engage with building officials countywide on a monthly basis. We have a building officials meeting, and they discuss amongst themselves refinements to reports, technical questions. So certainly it's an evolving thing. As was mentioned, the state is considering additional changes. So I have a feeling we'll be launching another series of webinars soon to educate the public again on whatever ends up being changed there.
Yeah, it's great to hear that the county's doing their part in educating our residents and keeping them up to speed. There's so many changes going on, so doing what we can to assist, it always helps. So Dan, I know, same as Robbie, we do a lot of webinars. We're always educating, the community association space. It feels like it's a double whammy, right? We're having reserves being pushed at one point. We're having insurance increasing significantly. Could you give our panelists here and individuals here what's going on from the insurance perspective from the Surfside bill?
Well, thank you to the LBA and everyone that's here. A lot of energy, obviously, the conversation out there. I'd be remiss if I didn't think that the insurance industry wasn't being opportunistic in a very tough time. There seems to always be an effort to overshoot the destination when it comes to some of the consumer legislation that we see unfolding right now in the current session that unfolded last year. Initially, the concerns going into those special sessions was to address homeowner issues. We saw broad legislation that impacted all lines of insurance. And today we are obviously in a very difficult time with regards to insurance, huge amount of influx of people down here. Buildings are occupied more than they probably ever have on a year-round basis. Your systems are getting stressed, and the insurance companies started to take a closer look at the way the buildings were actually being managed, in a lot of instances in these older properties, maybe even self-managed, and how they were reserving how they were reserving money, and also keeping up with those inspections. And we did see some insurers pull back initially, immediately after the tragedy, and then require additional inspections and additional underwriting. And then we saw this legislation get passed regarding roofs and various other obligations of the actual policyholder and not the insurance companies on the underwriting processes in order to place insurance. And they took more of a broad approach to it by putting all of the obligations or onus more so on squarely on the shoulders of the policyholders, but did not really tighten up their own underwriting processes at each one of the properties and sites as we saw it. They were still asking for the appraisals. We were still going through the appraisal process. And we think through the current legislation efforts that much of that is probably not going to change. There seems to be kind of at a standstill of trying to figure out how to attract new insurance companies to the market to give better opportunity or better product. And one of the things we have seen since last year to this year is actually some of those products be stripped of coverages that you would are now paying an enormous amount more money for. They're expecting another, I believe it's 30 to 40% rate increases on top of the reserve studies that are already done in the next, within the next year. So just compounding those issues. And I believe that a lot of associations, even the well-funded ones that are being newly turned over and dealing with the 558 processes that Robbie knows all too well, and many of the other issues that are going, it's really plaguing those associations with efforts of trying to get ahead. And when you have a lot of associations, particularly, I would say the northern part of South Florida area, maybe on a fixed income basis, and they're trying to figure out how do we maintain the structure of our property, but also keep up with the new lobbies and the new pool equipment and the new lounge chairs to attract people to our buildings so that our properties continue to demand a certain value. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we can actually even afford to insure these amenities and all these things that we want to be able to deliver. And we're already seeing some developers pull back on some of those amenities, even the most high-end buildings, to try to mitigate some of that expected cost, because when they turn over, they have to set those reserves, they have to look at those things, and then you get into that process of doing all those inspections that Robbie just spoke about. So I think a lot of this is a big question mark as to what's the future of insurance in Florida. Accountability is a big word that I preach. And on our live show that we do every week, on our seminars, on our continuing education classes, accountability needs to be a big one. Accountability with regards to where are these premium dollars going? What are they going to do in exchange for these payments and these costs associated with this insurance? Another thing that I don't think the legislator has been looking particularly close enough at are these issues and the changes that are going on within the sublimits of coverage. And I know that's particularly of an interest with regards to the Surfside litigation and issues that we saw there with regards to that deep investigation that went on with regards to insurance and coverage. And insurance to value was a big issue with Surfside. And a play that a lot of associations that are cash strapped are doing is not insuring to the full amount of the appraisal value, but picking a relatively arbitrary value of what they can afford. And that's a big move, and whether or not it complies with their obligations under Florida Statute 718 and 11 is questionable. I even question whether or not the product being sold right now in the state of Florida is even compliant. Any product is even compliant with the obligations of any association, even if they are insuring to the full value of that appraisal. So a lot of changes need to be made, and we need to start looking at the actual product being sold, and I think as we start focusing more on that, I think it's going to tell a little bit of a different story, and I think it's going to take a little bit of the spotlight off of the consumer advocates, the attorneys, the public adjusters, the contractors, where there's been major overhaul in legislation, and soon after all those bills were passed, curbing the assignment of benefits, curbing the one-way attorney's fees, attacking public adjusting, almost all the legislators that promoted those bills, even wrote the bills, came out and said, don't expect to see any savings. But again, since when was insurance about saving money, okay? Saving money or time? It's about protecting our financial interests. So I think we need to start realistically looking at the product that's actually being sold and then start talking about the cost of it and where that money's going once we pay it to the insurance companies.
Yeah, it's so much going on all at one time, as you mentioned, Dan. I mean, the great thing is that that's the benefit of these kinds of panels where we can all get different perspectives of, because so much impacts our associations, our communities, construction. So it's important that these conversations continue, because it does feel at sometimes that we're kind of rewriting everything of how building safety is going. We're rewriting how things are done for insurance. So it's a lot going on at one time. So thank you for that input. I wanted to bring in back Commissioner Garcia and see what are some of the unique challenges that Miami-Dade County faces in terms of building safety, and how does the Surfside bill address those challenges?
I think the most challenging part of the state legislation is really the reserves that need to be had right now. I think when we look at the unintended consequences of legislation, that's it right there. You know, God help us when Tallahassee gets together, legislators go and start legislating over us. God help us. It's an inside joke because I used to be a former legislator. Go ahead and laugh. You can laugh at me. I'm okay with it. But those are the issues, again, with insurance. this is why it's important for us as a community to voice our opinions and go up and advocate in Tallahassee. A lot of times our friends, our friends, they get up there, and they do have those knee-jerk reactions. I do agree with you. I think what was done in Tallahassee as it relates to insurance, no one can say that insurance is going to drop. I mean, as a matter of fact, they're all saying, "Oh, I think it's going to take us a couple of years before we start seeing any changes." And then within those years, then we start legislating and changing more and more and more. And this is the issues that we have. And again, with Surfside and the condo and the regulatory scheme that we have right now, I think that we are going to have some challenges in areas where you are not going to be able to have your traditional funding source. Hi, Luli. It's good seeing you. You're not going to have your traditional access to dollars in order to comply with the legislation that was passed. So those are some of the challenges. I'll tell you that, thanks to Lourdes and our team here in Miami-Dade County, we did lead the charge as it relates to I call it the condo, the Surfside bill that was happening in Tallahassee. We did lead the charge. A lot of the legislation that they have right now is language that came from our panels, language that came from the chairman's leadership committees that we put together. That's what Miami-Dade County does. Miami-Dade County was at the forefront at the 30-year inspection. Then now at the 40-year inspection, now the 30-year inspection. And Miami-Dade County was also at the forefront when we looked at who is doing the recertification. I think one of the biggest things that we came out with our ordinance was that a structural engineer has to do the structural component and an electrical engineer would have to do the electrical component. And I think that goes a long way to make sure that we do have a viable result of these structural engineers and electrical engineers, as opposed to what was happening in the past, right? Well, in the past was an architect or any form of architect could do the whole regulatory scheme. So I think, talk about the challenges. I think those are some of the challenges that we have, and these guys hit the nail right on the head. And as it relates to Miami-Dade County, I think we're working through some of these challenges, and hopefully I do think we are going to see a lot of these condos come back and say, we can't afford this. And either Tallahassee's going to have to help with some funding sources, or Miami-Dade County is going to have to figure out, I say you, we, all of us, are going to have to figure out how we help these smaller, poorer associations come up with the dollars to make sure that they have their recertification process done.
So I'm curious to ask, because in Florida, out of the 13 million voters, 9 million of them actually live in community associations. So bringing it down to a little bit of a local level, I'm curious to hear what has your constituents told you with regards to these reserve studies being implemented? Have you heard anything yet, or?
No, look, as it stands right now, I think people are fairly pleased with what happened, but the reserves is a huge issue. We have folks that have been coming to all of us saying, especially the smaller ones, not the multi-million-dollar ones, even the multi-million-dollar ones, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money you have to put on reserves, and then when you have all these other expenses for regular maintenance and upkeep of the building and trying to compete with new residents, that is going to compete for new residents with other condominiums, that is going to be a challenge. And that's something that the mayor's here. Hello, mayor, it's great to see you. It's going to be a challenge for this community to really confront and take on in the next couple of years.
So yeah, we're definitely, I can speak for us and our organization, we're in the forefront of dealing with it. And, some associations, we're seeing that they're going to see about a 70%, 80% increase in their maintenance fees, some even more. It really all depends because they're all different organisms. So it is something that's going to impact our community. I wanted to, since we're in the LBA and we're in a construction expo, I wanted to ask Dan, what are your thoughts with regards to the contractors? Because the work as of now needs to get done. The milestone reports need to get done. The structural integrity reserves reports need to get done. What are your thoughts? Do you believe we have enough contractors, enough engineers? I don't want to put you here on the spot, but
Well,
what are your thoughts?
Well, as a licensed general contractor, which I am, growing up in the construction business, I've sadly got to see the downturn in markets through the eyes of my father than my own, while both working for some of the largest general contractors in the country, but also having my own construction company and doing my own development projects in Miami-Dade. We have a development site in Alapata, which we pulled back on. We cleared the land, The property's sitting there, it's nice and fenced off, and there's grass growing on it now. So I think the immediate reaction to Surfside was one of opportunity for a lot of contractors and engineers. Sadly, though, I think a lot of the engineering firms woke up to the realization that with that opportunity comes a lot of liability and risk.
Yeah.
And I think that they retooled their approach to it. We saw some engineering companies actually rename and rebrand themselves as consulting companies and not engineering firms. And an effort, I believe, to broaden their services, but also to mitigate some of the liability or risks, which was exposed in the litigation that ensued after Surfside. So I think there's a lot of stress right now. I think there's an opportunity in the downturn of the market to address some of the issues because I believe our labor force, that there is some availability there. There seems to be a bit of a scarcity issue still with some of the materials, but I think people are looking for alternative products and different ways of doing things that are consistent with the standards which we all live and breathe and love in Florida, which became an international standard and continue to evolve that way as we tend to do that in Florida with many things, whether it's insurance and construction and many other things. I do, here being at the Lab Build Association and talking with other vendors who supply equipment and various other different types of materials, I do see that they have availability. They're ready to go. They're ready to react. Again, though, it comes down to dollars and cents. Is the money going to be there to make the repairs that are required by these reports based on the new standards? And what are those new standards going to be? And are your engineers going to be, whereas they may have overlooked something in the past or registered something as not as important as something else, are they going to be more strict on those standards and require a more broad or detailed scope of work, which is going to take substantially longer periods of time? And you understand the stresses of doing large infrastructure projects in someone's home or backyard, which that's what these vertical buildings are. And so I think that's going to stress, and people need to look for better ways to interact with their neighbors and be more of a community. Robbie and I sit through many of these meetings. I think board members, there is this concern that board members would no longer want to participate as volunteers. Are you going to pay me for those things? And where's that money coming from? And then you had a feeling or sense that unit owners were not going to want to vote for these things because typically board members ran on the idea that they were going to save the association's money.
Yeah.
So are they going to have money to be able to spend on these things and move these things along?
Of course.
And I think that's a bit of a concern.
No, yeah, we can spend hours here talking about this, but we got to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Dan. I do want to take the opportunity to really thank the public officials that are here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to go over these topics. Obviously, they're very sensitive in nature, but also very important for our community. Thank you, Robbie and Dan, for being here and being a director with the LBA, Dan. And I think you have some closing remarks.
Can I have a quick minute and say, Lauren, it's one of my legislative assistants' her birthday today. So happy birthday, Lauren.
Happy birthday.
She's going to kill me when I get out of here.
So
Now that's a good boss.
So for our closing remarks, the LBA was able to get Daniela Levine Cava to come here. So it's my great honor to welcome to our stage Mayor of Miami-Dade County, the Honorable Daniela Levine Cava.
Good morning, LBA. I never imagined that I would be speaking to this incredible organization back in the day. Thank you so much for everything you do, for everything you've done to build our community and put us on the map. Totally in awe of the important role that the LBA has played in our community. So thank you for the honor of letting me join you here today. And looks like it's happening. No place to park, can't get in, right? So this is the happening place. Congratulations to you. You've just heard from some of our best, from our Chief of Public Safety, Freddie Ramirez, our Director of our Building Department, Lourdes Gomez, from our former chairman and to-be mayor of Sweetwater, and our Senator and Commissioner Rene Garcia. So those are county, right? The other guys were smart private guys, but I just want to say they obviously have all been working really hard on these issues, and I'm very proud of the work that they did. So as far as lessons from Surfside, it's in my heart each and every day and in our community. We're still on Mission Surfside. We're still helping people recover from their losses. We're still helping people set up a memorial. We're still helping people make meaning of what happened. And so it is really wonderful that the county family has worked so hard to take what we learned at Surfside and put it into action with reforms. I'm very, very, very proud of that. So it was a time of true darkness and the world was with us, but it also was a time that created light, great light, for solutions that we've enacted locally and at the state level and with all of you, because it impacts you in your building, in your projects, and we're so grateful for your partnership in moving it forward. I've actually been on the quest to help families recover since I was involved in Hurricane Andrew. Who was around for Hurricane Andrew? All right, and again, LBA, a key player in rebuilding from Hurricane Andrew and all the tragedies. I actually was responsible for finding missing children from Hurricane Andrew. I was running the Department of Children and Families, foster care and adoption, and I was finding the children who had been displaced by the storm, the foster children, the children in their biological homes. And I learned then, and certainly I learned in Surfside, that we must thank our first responders, first and foremost, what they do, and all of our community leaders who step up to help us to deal with these kinds of tragedies. And you may have heard, I'm the collaborator in chief. That's my self-proclaimed title, but I think I've earned it. So I always work to bring people together to solve problems, and that is exactly what has happened. First thing, and I imagine that Lourdes Gomez told you about it, immediately we went out and inspected all of the buildings in the county's jurisdiction for the 40-year recertification, and we made sure that nobody else was in danger. We actually closed down a few balconies, and that was the extent of it. And we made sure. And we also have launched changes in the law led by now Commissioner Rene Garcia, more transparency for homeowners and condominium associations where we have to post the financial records, the inspection records, and make these things available to the public, to the residents, to buyers. Very, very important. We listened to experts. I'm sure many of you participated. We listened. What would be ways that we could strengthen our building code and protect the public going forward? We already have one of the strongest building codes in the country, but we've added more. We've added more. And we also know, as I heard discussed, that people cannot afford to make these necessary corrections to fix these problems. So we have done something really extraordinary, I must say, very proud of this. Using our surtax dollars, we created a program to give up to $50,000 interest-free loans over a 30-year period to those individuals who cannot afford these assessments. Thank you. Thank you, Gus. Thank you for the really incredible. And the first tranche was $9 million, and pretty much that $9 million is gone. But we are going to continue to increase it. It comes from our surtax dollars, which you guys pay with your deals. And what a good way to keep people in their homes. Otherwise, we would be facing that much more displacement from people not able to stay there. So up to $50,000, 30-year repayment, zero interest. And it's anybody up to 140% of area median income qualifies. So for a family of four, that's $136,000. So it doesn't benefit everybody, but it benefits people to our middle class, really. And that is really important because we cannot afford to let more people lose their homes. We also have invested hugely. That means you have, the taxpayers, in building more affordable housing. And I hope many of you are involved. And if not, that you get involved. We've spent in this year's budget $500 million. Okay, that's a lot of money. Yes, $500 million towards our housing program. We also launched a year ago tomorrow, or it's a year since we identified the housing emergency in our community with our building blocks plan, our building blocks fund, and we were able to close a lot of deals that because of the high cost of building, supply chain issues, those projects were languishing, and we were able to put last dollar in. So hopefully we're all going to see the benefit of that. In fact, we've got 32,000 units in the pipeline, 32,000 units of affordable and workforce housing. That's a lot. Unfortunately, it doesn't nearly meet the need, but it is a lot. And again, I hope you're involved. We also saved 22,000 families from eviction by paying their landlords the rent. Okay, just let me be clear about that. 22,000 households were not on the streets because of our programming, and we expanded that with county dollars to make more families eligible. We also have an Office of Housing Advocacy. They have been so busy, we've doubled their staff, and they are receiving thousands of calls, helping them to relocate if they lose their homes, helping them to get last dollar, to avoid eviction. Again, paying landlords, let me be clear, paying landlords. So I am very, very proud of the progress that we've made together. And I must say that we can't do it without you, our small businesses, our local businesses. And by the way, in Tallahassee, they were trying to eliminate our ability to favor local businesses with our county dollars. And I think we won that battle. Maybe some of you weighed in on that. So we no longer, God willing, will have a restriction on how we spend our local dollars to support our local businesses. That is really critical. So yes, thank you. Thank you to the lady in the front row clapping. I appreciate you. So we're also working to make a more business-friendly environment, to cut the red tape. And by the way, we're getting kudos for that. I don't know if you know, let's see, how many of you think, this is kind of a dangerous question, how many of you think that our county permitting process is moving quicker and better than maybe some other places? I'm not going to name any names. Okay, all right. Well, our new director of Public Housing and Community Development, he raised his hand. Good answer, Alex. Thank you. Truthfully, we get kudos a lot for our process being more efficient, but if it's not good enough, tell us what we can do to improve it. We want to continually improve. We also have a program for small businesses, Strive 305. Check it out, miami-dade.gov/Strive 305. We are helping thousands of small businesses to get whatever they need, to market effectively, and so on. And we also have launched our Procurement Academy for small businesses to make sure they can get access to county dollars. So there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur in Miami-Dade County. And all of you who are listening, and even those who are not, we salute you for what you're doing. Thank you so much to the LVA. Thank you for all you do. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you today.